Even today, Erwin Rommel remains one of the most recognizable commanders of World War II, still famously referred to as the Desert Fox for his daring initiative on the battlefields of North Africa. Rommel's legacy and ultimate destiny lay in his willingness to do something very few other generals would even consider: speaking the brutal truth about the progress of the war to Adolf Hitler. Erwin Rommel's young son, Manfred, witnessed his father's unpredictable relationship with Hitler. Rommel's honesty would one day cost him dearly.
Months after the defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler appointed Rommel to inspect the defenses of Western Europe. When Rommel first inspected the Atlantic Wall, he allegedly discovered a sobering reality. Hitler had boasted for years about impregnable coastal defenses, supposedly stretching 1,600 miles from Norway to Spain's border. What Rommel found existed more in the Führer's imagination than in concrete and steel. My father had a rather realistic idea of the Allied tactics and way of fighting, Manfred explained. Having fought Americans and British in North Africa, Rommel understood their capabilities and resources. He moved his headquarters to La Roche-Guyon, a 12th-century chateau overlooking the Seine's north bank, 40 miles closer to France's coast. From here, he would direct the defense. Rommel's strategy was straightforward. Rommel recognized that if the Germans were to stop an invasion in the west, they had to do it at the waterline in the first 24 hours of battle. Analysts noted, they could not let the Allied army get ashore in Western Europe. The reasoning was sound. Germany no longer controlled the air, Allied aircraft dominated. Germany's Atlantic Navy was nearly non-existent. Allied ships ruled the seas. The only advantage was defending fixed positions against troops landing on hostile beaches. But that advantage would vanish once the Allies established a beachhead. Not all German commanders agreed. Others, like Field Marshal von Rundstedt, believed in mobile warfare further inland. My father was not very convincing, Manfred admitted. Obviously, von Rundstedt still believed on the big mobile battle. But Rommel understood what others reportedly didn't want to accept. My father was also convinced that no mobile battle in the size of 1940 was any more possible, Manfred explained, because the Allied British and Americans were so superior in the air that they would have nailed down the German armor and it would have been hopeless for them. Rommel set about making Hitler's fictional wall real. He ordered hundreds of thousands of mines laid across beaches, thousands of obstacles constructed to destroy landing craft and impale paratroopers. Rommel hoped to place a very large number of mines, possibly tens of millions across the entire defense line, but before the invasion he managed only a few million, which was far less than he had planned. Rommel was like a jolt of electricity when he took over command, those serving under him recalled. He traveled constantly, inspecting coastline, sketching obstacle designs, and demanding action. He did a lot of fortifications himself, a lot of initiative and also imagination. But one crucial question remained. Where would the Allies attack? Logic suggested Pas de Calais, only 19 miles across the English Channel from England. Hitler believed Calais was the target. Rommel initially concurred. Neither knew they were being deceived. The Allies had created Operation Fortitude, one of history's most elaborate military deceptions. In southeastern England, opposite Calais, they built a fake army, inflatable tanks, dummy aircraft, false radio traffic, creating the impression of massive forces preparing to invade Calais. One of the great stories of World War II that is poorly known to this day is Operation Fortitude. Historians would marvel. And the Germans had no mean to find out if this is true or not true. It was in its own way every bit as complex and detailed and required as great a degree of precision as the Overlord landings on Normandy. The French resistance supported the deception effort, but most of the false information that reached German intelligence came from British-controlled double agents who pointed the Germans toward Calais. The activities of the French resistance were carefully coordinated with fortitude to again create the impression that the landings were going to happen in the Pas-de-Calais. Records showed Hitler became strongly convinced that Calais was the real target of the invasion, and this belief caused him to overlook the danger building in Normandy. Rommel strengthened Calais but also reinforced Normandy, adding Germany's battle-hardened 352nd Infantry Division there. Something about the situation bothered him. My father was absolutely certain that Germany cannot win any war anymore. Manfred remembered. By 1944, Rommel knew the war was lost. He reportedly hoped that by making the invasion costly enough, he might convince Hitler to seek peace before Germany's complete destruction. It was slim hope, but it was all he had. As June 1944 approached, Rommel continued inspections and training, pushing hard because time was running out. June's Channel weather was notoriously rough. Surely the Allies would wait for better conditions. Rommel had done everything possible with impossible circumstances. The Atlantic Wall was real now, deadly and waiting. What happened next would prove both his strategic insight and his inability to change the war's course. Around 7 o'clock in the morning on June 6, 1944, the telephone rang in Rommel's villa in Hurlingen with news that the Allied invasion had begun. The news was clear. The Allies were landing in Normandy. It takes 24 hours. Afterward, we knew what was going on. Manfred recalled. The timing was cruel and ironic. Of all days, the Allies chose one when Field Marshal Rommel wasn't in France. He was 500 miles away for two reasons: Lucy's 50th birthday and a planned confrontation with Hitler about the collapsing military situation. He had the intention to go to Hitler and tell him again what it would mean if Normandy has been fallen. Manfred explained. The early days of June brought very poor weather according to German forecasts, so many officers believed that an invasion was unlikely during that period. Channel weather was terrible: high winds, heavy rain, rough seas. He was very surprised, Manfred said, because German naval experts insisted no landing was possible. Yet Allied meteorologists spotted a brief weather window. Eisenhower made what seemed a risky decision. He said, "Go." And the location: Normandy, not Calais. Operation Fortitude had worked. German forces stayed concentrated at Calais, waiting for an invasion that never came. That morning, thousands of Allied aircraft and ships approached Normandy. The German response was confusion. The Luftwaffe considered weather unflyable. The Navy had almost no presence. Infantry units were the first to report the invasion. In Hurlingen, Rommel received the call from his chief of staff. Even then, doubts remained. Was this the real invasion, or a diversion meant to draw troops from Calais? Manfred was home on leave from flak helper duties. He watched his father react with frustration and anger. He said, "I wish I was in France." Headquarters still lacked a clear picture, but within an hour Rommel ordered his driver to prepare for departure. Rommel left Hurlingen late in the morning and reached his headquarters at La Roche-Guyon late that evening, by which time the Allies had already secured a firm foothold on the beaches, 12 hours after the battle began. By then, the Allies had suffered heavy losses but secured their foothold. Thousands of troops were ashore and pushing inland. Everything Rommel predicted was now reality. Allied air superiority was overwhelming. Roads and tanks were struck repeatedly from above. Allied ships controlled the channel, their guns firing deep inland. On June 7th, Rommel went to Normandy to assess the situation, then returned to headquarters. His conclusion was devastating. The Allies were firmly established, and nothing could push them back. Operation Fortitude kept working. Germany's 15th Army waited at Calais for weeks, expecting the real invasion. By the time they realized the deception, it was too late. A week after D-Day, Rommel knew the war in Western Europe was lost. My father was convinced that the Germans had never had any chance to win the battle under the beaches. Manfred said. On June 17th, Rommel met Hitler at the Margeville headquarters and warned him that the situation in Normandy was already slipping beyond recovery. On June 17, 1944, Hitler met Field Marshals Rommel and von Rundstedt at his forward headquarters in France, and the discussion became a clash between Rommel's realistic view of Normandy and Hitler's refusal to accept bad news. Rommel described the situation in Normandy by saying that the Allies now held a firm beachhead, and he warned that more Allied troops and supplies arrived every day, while German units could hardly move in daylight without being attacked from the air. So he argued that Germany had to seek political terms soon or risk a complete disaster in the West. My father even did not exclude that Hitler might give in when he sees that there is no hope. Manfred recalled his father's thinking. We cannot win the war, and this is not possible. We must see that. Hitler listened. Then he allegedly said something that revealed Germany's true horror. I see it well, but with me, nobody will make peace. Let that sink in. Hitler reportedly acknowledged Germany was losing, understood the war was hopeless, but also knew the Allies wouldn't negotiate with him personally. And rather than step aside, he was prepared to drag the entire nation down. Many people had to discover that Hitler would more like to lead the Germans to the disaster. Manfred remembered, and this is terrifying that he was almost successful. According to accounts, Rommel pushed harder. If the Allies wouldn't negotiate with Hitler, then Hitler should step down. It was the only way to save Germany. Rommel told Hitler to make peace even if that meant that Hitler had to step down as head of state. Scholars noted, the proper considerations have to be taken. For a German general to suggest this bordered on treason, but Rommel had reached a point where silence was impossible. Hitler refused. He wouldn't step down, wouldn't seek peace, would fight until the end. Through June and into July, Normandy deteriorated exactly as Rommel predicted. The Allies expanded their beachhead while German forces fought bravely but couldn't stop the advance. Meanwhile, whispers spread of a plot to assassinate Hitler. When conspirators allegedly approached Rommel, they found a willing listener, but not a willing participant. Many historians agree that Rommel was willing to see Hitler arrested and removed, but that he was at first against assassination, and they say he felt that killing a head of state was both illegal and dangerous for Germany, although some modern scholars think his views may have become more radical as the war went on. The great majority were passive. Manfred explained about resistance. It was not possible to tell to your friend, we should kill Hitler and make a revolution. Maybe the friend is such a patriot that he runs to the police, denounces you. Some evidence suggests Rommel may have been working on his own plan, not killing Hitler, but perhaps negotiating with the Allies himself if Hitler refused to surrender. On July 15th, Rommel wrote a 3-page letter to Hitler, his final attempt to make the Führer see reason. The letter reportedly laid out the military situation clearly. The war in the West was lost. Germany should seek peace immediately. The only thing that Erwin Rommel could have done, he could have done no other. Historians reflected. He could not have remained silent and watched the Germany that he loved be destroyed in the name of a man that he had come to detest. 2 days later, Rommel's career ended, but not by Hitler's hand, at least not directly. July 17th, 1944. Rommel's staff car rolled along a narrow Normandy road. He had been attending a conference with commanders about the deteriorating situation. Now he was returning to La Roche-Guyon. Then someone saw the flash of wings above as Allied fighter bombers dived toward the road, and later accounts suggest they were probably British or Canadian Spitfires, even though the exact pilots are still debated by historians. Car was forced off the road and into the ditch. The report stated, in the process, Rommel, who was sitting in the front seat, was thrown against the frame of the windshield, smashed to the left side of his face, to the point where it was almost disfiguring. Machine gun fire had raked the car, forcing the driver to lose control. Rommel was hurled forward, his face slamming into metal. They rushed him to a hospital. Manfred came immediately, fearing the worst. I first supposed that he would die on the same night. He remembered. His cheekbone was crushed. The orbit for his left eye received a fractured skull. Somehow, Rommel survived. My father did, Manfred said, and this was the end of his military career. The damage was extensive. Left side of face shattered, one eye socket fractured, skull cracked. The damage to Rommel's head and face was severe and left him in pain, but witnesses later said that he remained mentally clear and alert, even though the injuries forced him to leave the front and ended his active command. Rommel would never command troops again. He was relieved for medical reasons and sent home to Herlingen to recover. Some witnesses later claimed that Rommel was thinking about using his position in the West to open peace talks with the Allies if Hitler refused to act, and several historians believe he was moving in that direction, but there is no clear proof that a concrete surrender plan was already in place when he was wounded on July 17th. If such plans existed, they died on that French road. 3 days later, on July 20th, the plot to assassinate Hitler came to its violent climax at Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters. A bomb exploded in the conference room. Several died, but Hitler emerged wounded but alive. His rage was terrible. More than 5,000 people would be killed in Hitler's purge, most with no connection to the plot. The trials were show trials before the People's Court, where outcomes were predetermined. You didn't leave the People's Court with an acquittal, those who studied the trials noted. It was only a question of how much of a circus and how much of a farce they would make out of the proceedings before a pronouncement of guilt and a death sentence was handed down. On Hitler's suspect list, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Rommel was guilty of speaking the truth to Hitler, historians concluded. It didn't matter if he was in on the plot to kill Hitler or not. Rommel committed treason in Hitler's eyes for having a defeatist attitude. Evidence against Rommel was circumstantial. Some conspirators had mentioned his name, but there was no proof he actively participated in assassination planning. Facts didn't matter. Hitler wanted Rommel eliminated. Through late summer and autumn 1944, Rommel recovered at home, grateful to be alive, unaware that Hitler had already decided his fate. On October 14th, death came calling. When Erwin Rommel woke on October 14th, 1944, he did not know it was his last day. He ate breakfast with Lucy and Manfred, still recovering from his injuries but grateful to be home. Around noon, a Mercedes staff car arrived. 2 SS generals, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Maesel, asked to speak with him privately. What followed later emerged from fragments of testimony. They told Rommel that he was now suspected of acting against the Führer and that Hitler and the army leadership in Berlin had already decided his fate and would force him to choose between suicide and a show trial in the People's Court. Hitler offered a choice. One general carried cyanide. If Rommel took it, he would die quickly, his family would be safe, and he would receive a state funeral without disgrace. The other option was facing the People's Court, certain humiliation, a guilty verdict, and hanging, with no promise of safety for Lucy and Manfred. Rommel had 15 minutes. He spoke briefly with Lucy. "In a quarter of an hour I'll be dead," he reportedly said. Then he found Manfred and told him to be strong and protect his mother. Rommel stepped into the Mercedes with the generals. The car drove only a short distance and stopped. The driver and General Maesel walked away from the car, and Burgdorf stayed inside with Rommel for the last few minutes. The driver and General Maesel walked away from the car, and Burgdorf stayed inside with Rommel for the last few minutes. The poison acted fast. Within minutes, he was gone. On October 18th, Germany mourned him publicly. The official story claimed he died from earlier injuries. At the funeral, Field Marshal von Rundstedt read a speech written by Goebbels's ministry saying, "Rommel's heart belonged to the Führer," a statement that was, in truth, nonsense. Lucy and Manfred accepted condolences in silence, knowing the truth would endanger their lives. Rommel had warned Hitler repeatedly that the war was lost, and continuing would only destroy Germany. 7 more months of fighting followed, costing countless lives, and leaving the nation in ruins before Hitler finally killed himself on April 30th, 1945. History later recorded that Rommel had been right all along and had paid for his honesty with his life. The story of Erwin Rommel and Adolf Hitler is often framed as betrayal, but that misunderstands what really happened. Rommel didn't betray Hitler through conspiracy or assassination plots. His betrayal was simpler and more profound. Erwin Rommel told the truth. In a regime built on lies, where questioning the Führer was treason, Rommel committed the ultimate crime. He assessed Germany's military situation honestly and spoke plainly about what he saw. North Africa was lost. He said so. The Atlantic Wall was inadequate. He said so. D-Day meant the West was lost. He said so. Hitler needed to seek peace. He said that too. Every assessment proved correct. Every warning came true. Rommel wasn't spreading false gloom. He was giving honest professional military opinion. But in Hitler's Germany, honesty had become indistinguishable from treason. Rommel's transformation took years. There was no single moment of sudden realization. Understanding came gradually. First, the military reality that Germany couldn't win a two-front war, that Hitler's decisions were increasingly divorced from battlefield facts. Then came the moral shock, as reports and rumors about concentration camps, mass killings, and the regime's systematic crimes slowly became clear to him. What he learned and slowly understood about these crimes changed something very deep inside Rommel. My father discovered not only a lot of crimes which had been committed, Manfred said, but also that this will be a tremendous dilemma, and it will be impossible to come to a reasonable peace arrangement. By 1944, Rommel was increasingly aware that he had been serving a leader who was ready to sacrifice the country for his own illusions. That knowledge must have been devastating, realizing your loyalty, service, and military genius had been used for evil. Some generals never made that reckoning. They served Hitler until the end, claiming they were just following orders. They chose obedience's comfort over moral judgment's difficulty. Rommel made a different choice. Late, perhaps too late to matter much, he chose to speak truth. He risked everything, position, reputation, life, to try saving Germany from total destruction. There's something both admirable and tragic in Rommel's final year. Admirable because he found courage to speak when silence was safer. Tragic because he had been blind so long, because his awakening came too late to change outcomes. But he did speak. That matters. In a system designed to crush dissent, where truth could mean death, Rommel chose honesty over safety. The war was no longer about Germany. Observers noted, the war had morphed into being about Adolf Hitler. Hitler was no longer working for Germany's general good. He was using Germany to preserve himself. This was the real betrayal, not Rommel's honesty, but Hitler's selfishness. The Führer preferred seeing Germany destroyed rather than admitting defeat, preferred millions more dying to surrendering power. When his most celebrated general pointed this out, Hitler had him killed. The method reveals everything about the Nazi regime's final days. Hitler couldn't afford Rommel's public trial. The field marshal was too popular, his record too impressive. A trial would give Rommel a platform to speak about why Germany lost, about Hitler's strategic failures. So Hitler offered the cyanide vial and state funeral promise. Rommel took the poison to protect his family. He died to save Lucy and Manfred from Gestapo revenge. The state funeral that followed was propaganda. Von Rundstedt's speech about Rommel's heart belonging to Hitler was a lie, and everyone at high levels knew it. But maintaining fiction was important. Germany needed to believe all heroes supported Hitler. 7 months later, with Soviet soldiers in Berlin streets, Hitler finally recognized what Rommel had been saying since 1943. The war was lost. But instead of surrendering to save what remained, Hitler took his own life, and left Germany to face consequences of his catastrophic decisions. The broader lesson extends beyond one general and one dictator. It's about what happens when military professionalism confronts political fanaticism, about systems that punish honesty and reward obedience regardless of consequences, about the officer's eternal dilemma: when does serving your country require disobeying the leader who claims to embody it? Rommel struggled with these questions. His answer came late, but it came. He chose truth over loyalty to Hitler, chose Germany over the Führer. He paid the ultimate price. As autumn leaves fell around Herrlingen on October 14, 1944, as a black Mercedes carried a condemned general to death, one thing became clear. In Nazi Germany, the greatest crime wasn't treason against the state. It was speaking truth to power, looking at reality honestly, and refusing to pretend delusion was wisdom. Erwin Rommel betrayed Hitler by being honest. For that honesty, for refusing to participate in comfortable fiction that Germany could still win, for insisting on speaking plainly about military facts, he was murdered by the regime he had served. History vindicated every word he spoke. Every warning proved accurate. The Desert Fox saw the future clearly while Hitler lived in fantasy. But vindication came too late. The cyanide vial, the quiet death on a country road, the state funeral built on lies. This was how Nazi Germany treated one of its greatest generals when he dared tell truth. Rommel's final battle wasn't fought with tanks. It was fought with words, with reports, with letters begging Hitler for reason. He lost that battle. But in losing, he preserved something important: his integrity, his refusal to participate in the lie-consuming Germany. The Desert Fox died not as a traitor, but as one of the few German generals willing to speak plainly about reality. In Hitler's Germany, that made him dangerous. In history's judgment, it makes him tragic, a professional soldier who woke too late to the regime's nature, but found courage to speak truth when that truth could cost everything. And it did cost everything. But in those final months of 1944, Rommel faced death knowing he had tried to save his country from a madman's delusions. Hitler killed him for it. But the truth Rommel spoke outlived them both. October 14, 1944, Herrlingen, Germany. A black Mercedes rolled toward Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's villa like a shadow warning of something terrible. When the doors opened, 2 SS generals stepped out, one of them carrying a small glass vial hidden in his pocket. A vial that could end a life in just a few breaths. In the cold autumn air, the Desert Fox had only 15 minutes to choose how he would die. But what had truly brought Rommel to this moment? He never planted a bomb, never worked with enemy agents, and never plotted to sabotage the German army. His crime was not only speaking honestly about the military situation. After the July 20th plot, several officers mentioned his name during interrogation, which made him look suspicious in a regime that treated any sign of disagreement as treason. Rommel never conspired to kill Hitler, but his honesty cut just as deeply as any weapon, and for the collapsing regime, it was unforgivable.